For 12 years, Travis believed in the quiet strength of his marriage. He and Holly had built a life together, one stitched together with familiar comforts, weeknight dinners, whispered conversations in the dark, and the steady rhythm of their shared existence. They weren't the couple who sought grand adventures, but their love had always been solid, unshaken. Or so he thought. Holly's recent promotion was meant to be a celebration, a milestone they had both worked toward. Instead, it became the catalyst for an unsettling shift. At first, it was subtle. A lingering glance at her phone, a small, secretive smile. Then came the sudden late nights, the whispered work calls, the distant eyes that no longer looked at him the same way. Parker's name began to weave itself into their conversations, at first innocuous, just a colleague, just another team member. But the way Holly spoke about him, the way her voice softened, the way her laughter became breathy, unguarded, almost intimate, it set off a quiet alarm in Travis's mind. He dismissed it, told himself he was imagining things. But doubt had already begun its slow, corrosive work, gnawing at the foundation of everything he once believed was unbreakable. It started as a whisper in the background, a name woven effortlessly into conversation. Parker thought of this great idea. Parker and I had the longest meeting today. Parker really knows how to lead a team. At first, Travis brushed it off, assuming Parker was just another cog in the machine of Holly's high-stakes corporate world. But soon, Parker's presence began to loom over their marriage like a shadow that refused to fade. The first real pang of unease struck when Travis noticed the way Holly spoke about him. Not with the dry indifference she usually had for work colleagues, but with a subtle warmth. An admiration that sent a quiet shiver down his spine. He started seeing the shifts in her, the way she checked her phone just a little too often, how she seemed energized after her late nights at work, how she barely acknowledged his presence when she got home. Their usual easy conversations became strained. Her responses clipped and absent-minded. While he pressed, she sighed, rolling her eyes as if his questions were an inconvenience rather than a sign of care. Then there were the small but telling betrayals. The new lingerie tucked away in the back of her drawer, the scent of unfamiliar cologne on her blouse. The sudden obsession with looking her absolute best, even on casual workdays. It wasn't that she was just dressing better. She was transforming, sculpting herself into someone unattainable, someone desired. And it wasn't for him. One night, as they lay in bed, Travis reached for her, his fingers trailing softly over the curve of her hip. But she flinched, pulling away with a murmured excuse about exhaustion. That moment settled deep in his chest like a heavy stone, an unspoken truth he wasn't ready to face. The woman beside him, the one he had built a life with, was slipping away. And worse, she didn't seem to care. Parker was more than a name now. He was a presence, a ghost, an intruder in their home, stealing the intimacy that once belonged to Travis alone. And yet, Holly acted as if he didn't exist at all. Travis had always believed that love, real love, was built on trust, the quiet, unshakable kind that didn't require second-guessing. But as he watched Holly from across the room that evening, lounging on their couch with her phone tilted slightly away from him, laughing softly at a text message she never intended to share, he realized how naive that belief had been. Trust wasn't unshakable. It was fragile, and once cracked, it could never be whole again. He hadn't meant to look at her phone. He never wanted to be that guy, the jealous, paranoid husband sniffing around for clues. But when she left it face up on the kitchen counter as she disappeared upstairs for a shower, the screen lit up with a message that stopped him cold. "Wish you were here, babe." Travis's blood ran hot, his pulse a war drum in his ears. The text wasn't from him. He didn't even need to see the name. Parker. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Confrontation, accusations, demands for an explanation. But instead, an eerie calm settled over him. He wouldn't ask. He wouldn't beg for the truth. No, he would take back control. That night, when Holly returned to bed, she slipped under the covers as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't just been giggling over another man's affections. Travis turned to her, studied her. Deliberate kiss against the side of her neck, trailing his lips along her collarbone, his hands exploring in ways he hadn't in weeks. Holly stiffened, hesitating. But then she surrendered, melting into his touch. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if she had forgotten Parker, if she could still lose herself in him the way she once had. But as her fingers tangled in his hair, her lips parted against his, he realized with devastating certainty she wasn't thinking about him at all. The morning after, Travis lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of Holly's breathing beside him. The night before had been electric, their bodies tangled in a way that once felt like home. But now, it felt like an illusion, a desperate attempt to grasp at something that had already slipped through his fingers. He turned his head slightly, watching as she lay with her back to him, a soft glow from her phone screen illuminating the darkness. He didn't need to see what she was doing to know. It was him, Parker. His stomach twisted, but he didn't react. Not yet. Instead, he studied her, every subtle movement, every lingering pause in her typing, the tiny, unconscious smile playing on her lips. She wasn't just distracted, she was elsewhere, lost in a world he no longer belonged to. Sliding out of bed, he moved silently across the room, pulling on a pair of sweats before heading downstairs. He needed air, space, anything to clear the storm building inside him. He poured himself a coffee, gripping the mug tighter than necessary. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was real. The reality of it sank deeper as he replayed the little signs, the ones he had ignored for months. The sudden obsession with her appearance, the carefully curated excuses for late nights. The way her touch had become absent-minded rather than urgent. Holly hadn't been drifting away, she had been running. A soft creak on the stairs pulled him from his thoughts. Holly appeared in the doorway, her hair tousled, wearing nothing but his t-shirt. She offered him a sleepy smile. "You're up early," she murmured, walking over to wrap her arms around his waist. Travis stiffened beneath her touch, but forced himself to play along. He turned, pressed a kiss to her forehead, inhaling her scent, still his but not for much longer. "Just couldn't sleep?" He murmured against her hair, his voice even. She pulled back, searching his face for something, but whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it. Instead, she just nodded and reached for the coffee pot. And in that moment, Travis knew. She thought he didn't know, and that gave him the power. Travis had spent weeks carefully collecting the pieces of the puzzle, watching from the shadows as Holly played out her deception. Every lie, every whisper of Parker's name, every glance at her phone when she thought he wasn't looking, it all led to this moment. The moment he had been dreading, yet preparing for, like a man sharpening his blade for battle. It was a Friday evening, the kind of night they used to spend tangled together in bed, bodies warm and slick, breathless with the ease of love that once felt effortless. Now, their connection was fraying at the seams, and Travis wasn't about to let himself be the last to fall. He sat at the dinner table, swirling the whiskey in his glass, his patience wearing thinner with every passing second. Holly sat across from him, absent-mindedly pushing her food around her plate, her gaze flicking toward the clock on the wall. She thought he didn't notice, but he did. He noticed everything. "Got plans tonight?" he asked casually, sipping his drink. She blinked up at him, momentarily startled, before slipping into that practiced, easy smile. "Just a late meeting with the team. We're finalizing the quarter's reports." He nodded, watching her closely. "Must be exhausting. All those late nights." She shrugged, picking at her salad. "It is, but it's necessary." Travis leaned back in his chair, the corner of his mouth twitching. Necessary. A strange word for what she was really doing. The phone on the table vibrated, and she quickly flipped it over, but not before he caught the name. Parker. His heart slammed against his ribs. But outwardly, he remained calm. "Work stuff?" Holly hesitated, then nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just confirming some numbers." He let the silence hang between them, let her sweat under his gaze. "I'll drive you," he finally said. She froze, her fork hovering midair. "No, that's okay. I wouldn't want you to wait up." He smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips. "I insist." And just like that, the game shifted. Travis had always been a patient man. He knew how to wait, how to watch, how to hold back until the perfect moment arrived. And now, as he sat alone in his car, just a block away from the upscale hotel Holly had booked under the guise of a corporate retreat, he felt a strange calm settle over him. He had known for weeks, had felt the distance widening between them like a slow-moving fault line, but seeing it unfold in real time was something else entirely. His grip tightened around the steering wheel as he checked his phone. The private investigator he'd hired had already sent the photos, Holly stepping out her car, smoothing down the hem of her dress, her reflection shimmering in the glass doors of the hotel lobby. A minute later, Parker arrived. The way he touched her, the way she leaned into him. It was unmistakable. This wasn't just some casual flirtation. It was intimacy. It was familiarity. Travis exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay measured. His blood burned. His pulse pounded in his ears, but rage wouldn't serve him tonight. No, he needed to be precise, surgical. He stepped out of the car, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve, and made his way toward the hotel. Inside, the air was thick with expensive cologne and the hum of low conversation. He walked with purpose, his posture easy but commanding, as if he belonged there. The receptionist barely glanced up as he strode past, heading for the elevators. He knew the room number. The confirmation email Holly had carelessly left open on her laptop had told him everything. Standing in front of the suite, he could hear them inside. Low murmurs, a soft laugh, the clink of glasses. He knocked. 3 sharp raps against the wood. Silence. Then movement. A second later, the door cracked open, and Parker's face appeared, confusion flickering across his features before realization hit. Travis smiled. The game was over, and now it was time to settle the score. The moment Parker's face registered who stood before him, his smug confidence wavered. A flicker of unease passed through his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by his signature arrogance. "Travis," he said, feigning surprise, his hand still gripping the edge of the door. "Didn't expect to see you here." Travis let the silence stretch, studying Parker as if he were nothing more than an insignificant speck of dust in his path. Inside the room, he could hear Holly's hurried footsteps approaching. She must have realized something was wrong. Good. Let her sweat. "Didn't expect to be here," Travis finally said, his voice deceptively smooth. But then again, life's full of surprises. He took a slow step forward, forcing Parker to either move or be pushed aside. Parker hesitated, but Travis was already inside. And there she was, Holly, standing in the middle of the dimly lit suite, wearing nothing but a silk robe loosely tied at the waist. The sheer fabric clung to her curves, evidence of exactly what she'd been doing just moments before. Her eyes widened in horror as she clutched the robe tighter. "Travis," he held up a hand. "Don't." Not a single word. Holly swallowed hard, her chest rising and falling with panicked breaths. Parker, the coward he was, took a half step backward as if he could somehow disappear into the walls. Travis let his gaze sweep over the room, the unmade bed, the 2 half-empty glasses of wine, the expensive dinner trays pushed aside on the table. This wasn't just a mistake. This was routine. Planned. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained eerily calm. "So, this is where my wife's loyalty lies? In cheap hotel rooms with another man?" Holly flinched. "It's not what it looks like." Travis let out a slow chuckle, shaking his head. "Holly, you insult me. It's exactly what it looks like." His voice dropped lower, laced with a quiet, simmering rage. "And now, you're going to watch as I take back everything you try to steal from me." Parker took another step back. "You should have run." Holly's breath hitched as Travis stepped closer, his presence consuming the space between them. She was still clutching the silk robe around her, but it did little to shield her from the truth hanging heavy in the air. Her eyes darted to Parker, as if the man she had so willingly welcomed into her bed could somehow save her now. But Parker had no heroism in him. He was already inching away, the confidence he once exuded draining with every passing second. Travis exhaled, slow and controlled, his gaze never leaving Holly's. "You should sit," he said simply, nodding toward the bed. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried weight, authority, a command she was too afraid to disobey. She lowered herself onto the edge of the mattress, fingers twisting the fabric of her robe, her knuckles turning white. "Travis, save it." His voice was steel. "I don't want your excuses. I don't want your lies. I want you to sit there and listen." Holly's mouth pressed into a thin line. She knew there was no coming back from this. No sweet words or crocodile tears that could undo the betrayal she had so willingly indulged in. Travis shifted his attention to Parker, who had somehow convinced himself he still had a way out of this. "And you," Travis continued, his tone sharpening, "you're going to learn the hard way that some men don't let things slide." Parker scoffed, though was weak. "What are you going to do? Hit me?" Travis smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of his lips. "Oh, Parker, if only you knew what was coming." And just like that, the unraveling began. Holly sat in the dimly lit hotel room, the weight of her choices finally crushing her. The glow of her phone screen flickered against her tear-streaked face as she scrolled through messages that went unanswered. Travis had moved on. and she was nothing more than a painful memory in his past. Parker had disappeared, slinking back into whatever shadows he crawled from, unwilling to face the destruction they had caused together. The life she had once known, the stability and security of her marriage, had shattered like glass, and now, all she had left were the sharp edges cutting into her regret. Meanwhile, Travis was thriving. The man she once dismissed as too predictable had become a force of his own, reclaiming the life she had so carelessly discarded. His presence was stronger, his confidence unshaken. He no longer carried the weight of betrayal, but instead wore resilience like armor. He was done grieving what was never real. The world that had once revolved around Holly had stopped spinning, and she was left standing alone, watching him move forward without a second glance. And in that bitter silence, she realized she had lost everything, and Travis had only gained more. Betrayal and heartbreak are painful, but they often serve as a wake-up call, a reminder of what truly matters. In today's world, where distractions and temptations are everywhere, relationships require effort, communication, and respect. If someone takes you for granted or disrespects your loyalty, walk away with your dignity intact. Prioritize your self-worth and never let another person define your happiness. Growth comes from adversity, and sometimes losing someone who never valued you is the greatest win. Focus on becoming stronger, wiser, and more fulfilled. The best revenge isn't bitterness. It's building a life so good that they become irrelevant.